Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and Daniel is in California. He is dealing right now with a family problem and illness and actually the loss of his father, but he's anxious to be in this studio, so next week he'll be back in the studio. But Daniel, welcome to the program, and I'm sure our viewers all express their sympathy for you and your family.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. I'm glad to be with everyone.
Oh, very good. And we've talked on this, not only you and I, but Chris and I have talked about this, and this is surveillance, and our viewers are really concerned about that, like I am too, because when you search for the answers, you get a lot of questions, and people know that this whole movement with vaccine involves Bill Gates of the world, and we can't trust Fauci. So this is something that is of great concern, and so we have a mixed bag. We see a greater number of people who are growing reluctant to, want to use a vaccine. At the same time, they may be forced to. It may be practical because they might lose their job if they don't do it. At the same time, there's a lot of people who honestly believe they need it, and they are convinced it's very dangerous, and they're anxious to have it. In the other sense, though, we have a lot of people, and I'm probably more in this category, that is what is coming with this vaccine may be something never done before. They've had vaccines for a long time. They've had good vaccines that have worked rather well, and they've also had vaccines that have been deadly. And that's a lot of what's in the literature. And of course, we've expressed concern about what's going on right now. But we also have a lot of people writing in, and we've had people on our program that have expressed really serious concerns about what might come out of a vaccine, both the pressure and social pressure, and also the sort of the pressure on your job. If you don't do what they tell you, you might lose it. At the same time, there are some medical ramifications, and I have often mentioned the case that I was first had to vote on back in '76. More people died from the vaccine than they did from the swine flu, and they rushed the vaccine through. And of course, it's not so difficult for us, Daniel, to come up with a position that should help solve this problem, and that is just a little bit more freedom, of choice. Let the individuals pick. If we don't think too highly of these masks, and that there's danger in them, at the same time, we're not telling people you're not allowed to wear a mask. But we do resent the whole idea of using force, intimidation, blackmail, and pressure, and all these things, and also people who would like to see the surveillance state continue to grow and for the individual to become insignificant.
Yeah, and we were inspired to talk about this, and I know you and Chris talked about it recently as well, but John Whitehead had a great article for the Rutherford Institute, and we'll actually put it up on the Ron Paul Institute website later today for people to read. But he does talk about the surveillance state being really ramped up because of the COVID-19. And as we write in the description of our show today, this is not unusual for governments to do. We knew after 9/11, Congress scrambled to pass the PATRIOT Act. Most members of Congress had no idea what was in it. They hadn't read it, but they feel this pressure to do something. We got to hit the terrorists who attacked us. We got to get the terrorists who attacked us. The fact of the matter is, as we found out from Ed Snowden a few years later, the PATRIOT Act had very little to do with actually getting terrorists. What it had to do with is surveilling all of us and treating us like we were terrorists. And that's exactly what's happening with the rush to the COVID-19 vaccine. As John Whitehead points out, this is like the PATRIOT Act, but it's actually even worse because it's internal, it's personal, and it's digital, the surveillance of us. The internal in terms of injecting this RNA vaccine into people. It's something that has never been done before. It's personal, as you point out, Dr. Paul, in your introduction, because it's tracking us personally. You can't get on a plane, maybe. You can't keep your job, maybe. You can't travel. It's like an internal passport, having your vaccine passport. So it really is like the PATRIOT Act on mega steroids. And this is what's unraveling. And the same fear that was used to pass the PATRIOT Act is now being used to force the vaccine on people. And as you say, if people feel comfortable, they want to have that vaccine, they should be allowed to do it. But the people who don't want it should certainly be allowed to opt out.
Yes, the enemy of liberty they use very often, a crisis like this to expand their role in controlling people. But the large majority, the masses of people who seem to be clamoring for it, and that number is shrinking, they usually are motivated by fear because they're scared to death. But those who have other ulterior motives, in order to get people motivated, they have to tell a few lies. It's sort of like trying to get people to support a war that was created by our own government and motivated by our government. It is to scare people to death. We're going to be bombed tomorrow by Saddam Hussein. And then the people will say, well, you can't go to war now. You can't avoid going to war now. So now we're in this war against the virus, and there's a lack of effort to get common sense out of this. But the whole thing is a lot of people are truly scared. They don't understand the whole law, and they want to go along with it. Of course, our position, where individuals are responsible for making these decisions, and they should be allowed, and they shouldn't be coerced into it. This is a big difference. But the big thing, the point I want to make, though, is for governments to succeed in these kind of efforts. Let's say that the truth of the whole matter is the data and all the stories that we've heard and the disaster of COVID is a bit stretched. So they have to lie about it. And the government is pretty good at lying, for things. Sometimes they even do it in elections. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed that. But governments, eventually have to lie to maintain their power. And then the saying is that if you have to lie, you will, in order to preserve the empire. And this is what they're doing. They're preserving the power. You hear these stories, you frighten people, and then you have this other thing: the philosophic people, the people who are making money, and the stretch continues. And right now, this whole stretch about safety and different things, there's so much that they don't know. If a person is objective and reads everything they can on this, they can realize that for every absolute statement made by the promoters of this, they probably raise more questions than they answer. And of course, we hope we can guide people on this. But for me, it's a generalized answer, and that is let the individuals make the decision. Let the patient, the families, the doctor-patient relationship, all these things, and not let a couple bureaucrats. Whoever thought a year ago that Fauci would be as tyrannical and have as much authority as he has over the people? I mean, it's incessant. And but I think there's a shift to that. I think there's a change in attitude. So therefore, I think getting out any information, encouragement for people to look at this more objectively is worthwhile.
Well, speaking of Fauci and lies in the same sentence, that's probably a good way to put it. And it was recently. I mean, it was this week that, of course, the media would never tell you this, but Fauci was really shown to be, if not a liar, then certainly yet again another flip-flop, and that is when he admitted that the kids should be in school. He said they're not getting this virus, they're not getting sick, they're not transmitting the virus to people, there's no danger of it. And this is in direct contradiction. And actually, The Hill, I think it was, wrote an article saying that Fauci owes Rand Paul an apology. Because remember, it was just a couple of months ago that Fauci was up on the Hill in the hearing, and he said the opposite. And when Senator Paul said, hey, what's going on with the kids? Why can't they go to school? They're not getting sick. Fauci flat out lied and said, that's absolutely untrue. I don't know where you're getting this, Senator Paul. You're out of your mind, essentially is what he said. And now here he goes and he flip-flops and says, well, that's the case. The kids aren't getting it. I guess we messed up. And meanwhile, kids are committing suicide. They're not getting education. They're being treated very, very badly. But, as you mentioned, I'm out here in California, and I don't watch the news ever because it's all lies. But the news happened to be on in the house I'm in, and it is nonstop, wall-to-wall fear mongering, even the commercials, the Christmas commercials, everything. In the time of COVID, you got to do this and that and the other. It is non-stop. It's incessant. They had a guy on TV yesterday saying, unless everyone gets the vaccine, it's not going to work. 80% must get it or it won't work. And this is what they're drilling into people's heads. It is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it, Dr. Paul.
You know, we've all generally have accepted the notion that truth is treason in an empire of lies. So when they start telling these lies, then you become treasonous if you don't obey the law. Truth is, they don't want you to tell the truth. That's their greatest enemy. But you know, that isn't what they're saying currently. They've modified this a little bit. In California, they're talking about, well, if you don't have a mask on, it is so bad, and you're spreading a disease, which they've never proven that these masks, lack of a mask spreads the disease. Matter of fact, the opposite is probably true. But they say, and they make the accusation that you are a terrorist. Well, when you get to be a terrorist, you're practically, committing treason, and you're a bad guy. So yes, they're using those kind of words. You'd think they would lose all credibility, but they still know that fear is a powerful tool, so they're going to keep plugging away. You know, truth does win out in the end, but the longer we wait, the worse things get. Sometimes, I think at times about, the difficulties in this country in November of 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. Well, everybody knew Oswald did it. It was over and done with. They quickly had the investigation, and yet, as time went on, now 80% of the American people, they don't believe that. So yes, we want the truth, but we want the truth before they make all of these mistakes. So they have to be called to task. And I think the point that you were just making, that they change their minds. They say one thing, and then they turn around and say something else, and they're not called to task for it. So I think that's our job. Daniel, I want to move on and touch on a couple points, though. One that has been really in the news, which got a lot of attention, and I just don't know why the enemy, and that's the people that are promoting all this nonsense going on and all the lockdown. The thing that's going on in New York City, the bar owner that gets locked down, and he stood up to him, and he, of course, over the weekend, the news was out, that he was arrested for disturbing the peace. And they march in there with a slew of sheriffs and arrest him in his bar, in his business. Never said a word that would cause any disruption, and he gets arrested for disturbing the peace. I think they have it turned around, but anyway, he was hauled off in handcuffs, and boy, this has to be serious. A person that was perfectly in his right, if they were following the Constitution and common sense and some medical knowledge, they wouldn't be worrying about this, and yet, of course, the strongest argument that the bar owner had was what was going on about a block and a half away. No restraints whatsoever, big companies making a lot of money, and he just stood up to it, and they can't do it. And the truth is treasonous to them. He was telling the truth, and he was standing behind it. And he had a lot of supporters come out, but there's going to be a lot of opportunities for the rest of us to stand firm and stand up to the thugs that come along and try to terrorize us by lying to us about what is really going on. And right now, everybody has to be prepared. The next 3 months, this is just the beginning of this horrendous problem. These are the worst 3 months ever. And the flu season's coming, Daniel, and you know what they'll do with the numbers on flu? All of a sudden they'll be attached to something else, and the people will become more frightened.
Well, the CDC has already announced that they're not going to measure the flu at all this year because of COVID. They're too busy with COVID. So everything is being coded COVID. There's money in it. We've talked about it. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a fact that's been confirmed. I just want to go back a little bit, Dr. Paul, when you mentioned this is the mayor of Lancaster, which is in Los Angeles County, actually not that far from where I am right now, who declared that anyone who doesn't wear a mask is a domestic terrorist. And that's pretty serious, because you think about incitement to violence. If you label someone without a mask on as a terrorist, you are inviting someone to smash his face, to shoot him, to run over him. This is, I think, worse than calling fire in a crowded theater. Yet these people are able to, these so-called leaders are able to make these claims, this incitement with impunity, to harass and destroy people with impunity. But I think, on the New York issue, hats off to this gentleman. And he's like our hairdresser in Dallas who said, I'm not closing my shop. He said, I'm not closing my bar. And he found out a lot of people came out to support him. This is the kind of event, I think, that will catalyze people's opposition because they can relate to this person. They are also seeing how the big box stores are turning trillions of dollars in profits from this forced lockdown. Well, small business owners like this gentleman are being forced out of business. This is also not a conspiracy, that this is part of what they call the Great Reset. It's openly discussed. It's on the cover of Time and Newsweek magazines. They're using COVID as an opportunity to massively reset the entire world economy away from what little free markets we did have and more toward a corporatism that, Dr. Paul, you've talked about for decades. This is what it's all about. They're open about their desires to do this, and they are actively doing it. So, but as you point out, it's not hopeless. There is a backlash, and that's what we have to keep fighting for, to encourage people to fight for their freedom.
Well, Daniel, we may be needing your help back here in Texas when the opportunity presents itself, because we're having trouble in Austin, and there's a mayor up there that just announced that that you have to follow the laws, and we wrote the laws, and you're not allowed to do this, this, and this. But the terrible irony of this, somebody said he deserves the award for the grandest of all hypocrites. He writes up all these things in the great state of Texas, but a lot of people in Texas don't consider Austin really exactly a part of Texas. That's why we should permit secession. Secession would be very good, even domestically, but maybe we should have expulsions too. But anyway, the mayor issued all these rules and regulations. They were totally outlandish. But the irony is I think this is right, and Daniel, I think you know a little bit about this. I think he was in his airplane, his jet, and his family flying to Mexico to have a grand holiday, and he wasn't even in Texas. He was issuing these orders while he was disobeying these orders, and I think that's why he got the award for the grandest of all hypocrites. But, the people in Austin, probably re-election. I think the Statesman, which is not considered a libertarian newspaper, told about this. So there is a limit to how far the hypocrisy can go.
Yeah. Well, when they embarrass these people, when they become subjects of ridicule, that's when the fearmongers are very nervous. And his name is Steve Adler, and he hosted a big wedding for his daughter. And then part of the wedding party jumped into a private jet and jetted off to Cabo San Lucas for a nice sunny holiday while he was literally in his resort in Cabo. He went on Facebook Live and said, "People of Austin, you need to stay home. You must stay home. Don't you go out." And here he was, probably in his swimming trunks, getting ready to go jump in that nice blue ocean. And that is dangerous. And I think if we can crack this tyranny, Dr. Paul, I think it is going to be because of the hypocrisy of the so-called leaders. And we've talked about this. We've made a point of talking about it. It's not just Austin. Out here in California, where I am, there is a lot of backlash. The mayor of San Francisco, and Adam Dick from RPI wrote about it yesterday. She was caught at the same restaurant that Gavin Newsom was. $300 for a plate of spaghetti. She's up there having a $300 dinner at least. And it turns out she's locking everyone else down in San Francisco. An LA County commissioner, immediately after she voted to shut down all restaurants, she rushed out to her favorite restaurant where her spokesman said she eats every single day. She went out there to have a meal at the restaurant, the very restaurant she was closing down. I don't know if I would have eaten that food if the cook knew. She was closing down the restaurant that day. But over and over, you're seeing these hypocrites, the people who want to lock everyone else down, all the peasants like us, lock us down, where they are dining on $300 plates of pasta.
Right.
That is what's going to crack this nut, I think, Dr. Paul.
You know, one of the definitions for a sociopath is they have no shame. They do things which are so outlandish and so bad and so evil, but they never blink an eye. You know, they look at you square in the face and they can tell it to you. And sometimes they're very convincing. A psychopath is more, you know, they're known for being very convincing. But a sociopath, they don't have any conscience, I guess, and they never will. You can't reason for them. You can't get this mayor in place and we sit down and we say, well, we need to explain a few things to you. I mean, it won't work. You have to go to the people who have to object and send a few thousand people to boycott them or something. But I want to mention something about Minneapolis because, you know, there's a lot of trouble up there. The violence now has been documented, tremendous increase. And this is related to what has just happened, you know, in the election because in spite of the questions raised about exactly the presidential race, there's something really inconsistent because when you go to the grassroots, actually there was a grassroots tremendous victory for the Trump people. And I think it has to do with the violence in the city and that people did vote differently. And there's evidence to show that minorities shifted to voting Republican. And I think it's the violence in the city that does this because, you know, not everybody, even if they're a progressive and a liberal, that doesn't mean that they're sociopaths, that they will have some shame or they will, you know, wake up and say, well, maybe some of this is true. So they're now shifting this attitude, and the inner city now it's turned into just a violent mess, and it is related. So what did they do? What did the mayor do for there? And that is, oh, well, we do have a problem. It must be the fault of the police. And so what we're going to do is, you know, defund the police. So the police, there's police that aren't trustworthy, but most of them are trustworthy and would do something. But because even they're all quitting. So it's a real mess. But the evidence is coming in now. The complaints before. But I think it's related to the distortion in our voting pattern, at least the way the votes have been reported, and this would explain a few things.
Yeah, I think certainly the explosion of violence in the liberal towns in the U.S. definitely fed the vote in favor of Donald Trump. You know, he had unprecedented numbers of African Americans, Hispanics voting for him. And I think that may have terrified the Democrats. And I think as we see more and more evidence of widespread cheating in the election, I think they realized that they had to do something. And, you know, we know in the polls, we know that the vast majority of Republicans believe that the election was stolen. I saw a poll yesterday saying something like 25% of Democrats think that there was cheating in the election as well. So when you have a system right now that is so broken that virtually a tiny percentage of Americans actually trust in it, you've got a huge crisis. And it's a crisis that was created by liberal mayors who allowed their cities to become war zones, who dictated to people they can't go out and they must shut their businesses down. And, you know, I do think that the depression of people being locked down and having their lives taken from them, you see it and you see what it does to people and you see that it kills so many people. You just wonder at some point, will there be hell to pay for what they've done?
Daniel, we've talked about for several minutes on the issue of LA and their lockdown, but I want to just give you another chance to make any more comment because the headline is very clear. LA even poses the toughest lockdown yet to avoid devastating tipping points. That's the issue, that this is coming, and it's really the fear mongering. And of course, that's where they had talked about domestic terrorism. So this is something that the people are concerned about, but it's ongoing, and hopefully we can wake up a few people because those who want to promote it are very determined.
Well, they are using California, and again, they are using without any shame. They are using the issue of cases, which simply means a positive test. And we've talked ourselves blue in the face, Dr. Paul, about the problems with the PCR test. Fauci himself admitted that anything above a 35 cycle magnification should be considered a false positive, and we're running 40 and more times amplification of these little particles. So we know that these are false positives to a great degree. Even Fauci says this is not us saying it, but they're using cases. But I just saw some statistics from hospitalizations in California, and the fact of the matter is, with some exceptions, they are nowhere near capacity. You're having a spike throughout the country of people that are dying of respiratory diseases, but we don't know if it's flu anymore because they won't tell us. We won't know if it's a pneumonia because they won't tell us. All they're talking about is cases. There is a backlash in California, and if we're ready to finish, I'll just finish by saying this, Dr. Paul. There was an important hearing in LA County yesterday where the Restaurant Owners Association took their case before a sympathetic judge, and the judge admonished the LA authorities, the health authorities, you came to this hearing and you didn't bring a single piece of evidence that outdoor dining is spreading this disease. I'm giving you 24 hours to get your rear ends back there and find me a study, find me some science, find me some proof that doing this is leading to this crisis, or I'm going to overturn the outdoor dining ban. And that is an encouraging phenomenon, Dr. Paul. So I'll just close finally by thanking our viewers for watching and thanking all of you for your understanding that we're in a little bit of a strange situation. It's a little uncomfortable not being in the studio. I promise I'll find a better backdrop next time. I look forward to being back in the studio, and certainly thank all of you for your sympathy.
Well, and on your statement there, Daniel, I think we can say all is not lost, and that's encouraging. And that's the reason, I get challenged not too infrequently that, your optimism is not deserved. But no, the good parts we're optimistic about, and that's the way the world works. And compared to what? And there's a lot of other problems going on. But the encouragement is that with the proper reaction and education and motivation, people do react in a good way. I just don't think everybody's born to be the psychopath. I think the psychopaths and the sociopaths are limited in number, but they have loud voices. So I'm going to close by just quoting an article that came out this morning on Zero Hedge. And the article is 5 Burning Questions About the New COVID Vaccine. And this was authored by Kit Knightley, offguardian.org. And he asked 5 burning questions. And I'm just going to mention what they are because the conclusion of these was usually negative. He doesn't come up with a favorable answer. He asks these questions, but he really is concluding saying, we're not getting a lot of encouragement from it. The questions he asked was, will the vaccine work? And that was inconclusive. Is it perfectly safe? That was not conclusive. What's in it? What's the actual substance? Could there be mercury in there? No, you can't find out what that is. Who's going to get it? Well, if it's really, really good, the rich people are going to get it. If it's risky, the masses are going to get it because some people may die from it if they're still doing the testing. You have to remember, these vaccines don't even get a license for 10 years until they really know that they're safe. So, all this stuff that they rush these through, this is a fantastic political victory. We rushed this through in 8 months, and we have this vaccine. We can vaccinate millions of people now. Well, that's what should scare you, because vaccines are not so simple as just whipping it out. No matter who, doing it quickly doesn't solve a problem. And then the other question, will it be mandatory? And that's, so of course, we addressed that already because that's where the real evil is. So when there's choices out there and things aren't mandatory, people can make their own decisions. It's when you don't have a choice in medical care, when you don't have an option and it becomes mandatory, that is going over the line to authoritarianism. And that is where things are very, very bad. They may be doing dumb things, but we have to always have a choice. That's why I argue the case. We have to have a choice in medical care. We have to have a choice in the monetary system and economic choices, in social associations and getting along with people. is as long as it's voluntary, believe me, society would be much happier. And when you read the Constitution and look at our history, there's a very, very strong trend in both that defends this whole concept of voluntarism. That's what freedom is all about. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.